Hello, and welcome to this Ingenta webinar on open access and Plan S. Ingenta produce numerous products for publishers, including content discovery platforms like Ingenta Edify, Ingenta Connect Unity, Ingenta Connect, and Ingenta Open. These platforms can offer open access, various subscription models, and various other configurable options. In this webinar, Rebecca Reinhardt from Maverick Publishing Specialists is our guest speaker, and she will discuss open access Plan S and the challenges faced by publishers. Rebecca spent a career in STM publishing books, journals, and digital products before joining Maverick Publishing Specialists, a worldwide publishing consultancy, and she has worked in various medical societies, managing their publishing operations. Most recently, she was publisher at American Psychiatric Association Publishing, and she is now affiliate senior associate partner with Maverick, focusing on helping societies and non-profit associations with their publishing needs. They'll now pass you over to Rebecca. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mike, and thank all of you for being here, and to Ingenta for having this session. I think it's a very important thing for all of us to monitor, and I'm pleased to be able to talk with you a little bit about it. During the discussion, we will talk about the scope of the whole issue of Plan S, who it affects, what its components might be, what kind of effects it would have on society, scholarly publishing, publishers, librarians, and researchers, and what you can do. There are some things available to you now to assess risks, ensure compliance with a lot of the conditions of Plan S, and just gather information that can help you with further decision making. And that's what I'll try to focus on during this discussion. But first, a little bit about Maverick, my home. So we're a well-established publishing consultancy established in 2008. And Maverick is has a network of over 200 publishing associates all over the world that cover all aspects of medical and trade publishing. And their focus is to try to provide operation support services that allow publishers to put their strategies into action. So we have a very flexible, very nimble model that works for all different kinds of publishers. And this is a sort of graphic that our president, Martin Marlowe, has put together. He calls it his Sputnik, but I think it really captures the different areas that we work in. So we cover digital and e-publishing strategy, of course, and that's a growing area of our business. Marketing development and sales, as well as market research, customer analysis. Another growing area is technology and content development, including discovery, strategic and operational marketing and production, in that we can actually implement a marketing program or put people in place to help you do it, and executive search and recruitment. So we try to cover all the bases, and among our associates, we usually have the talent that we can put together a team to serve whatever needs may arise. And the people that we help come from all areas of the industry. You can see that some of our clients represent commercial and nonprofit publishers. We also have learned societies, which is my emphasis in Maverick. I'm the society person because that was where the bulk of my career was spent. But also we feel that societies have emerging needs that issues like Plan S are exemplifying. And we also provide help with service providers and vendors. So we try to connect people to serve whatever need they might have. And sometimes that's a team, and sometimes it's a group of vendors or suppliers who may be helpful. But that gives us a lot of exposure in the industry to what's going on. And that's why I'm very thankful to have an opportunity to tell you a little bit about what we're doing and how perhaps we can help you. Maverick's put together a survival guide for mostly for societies, smaller societies that may be grappling with the Plan S. And it's really a way of assessing vulnerability. What is your risk from Plan S, and what kind of opportunities can arise with open access? So as a part of this plan, we do an assessment of the business models and the revenue, look at open access models and requirements and how they might fit with individual programs, look at platform and repository compliance to see if there's something that could be done now to make things easier down the road if you do decide to switch to open access. And what are the components of a transformative agreement? They come in different flavors, and I think it's important to know if which one of those types of agreements might work in various settings. And then what you can do to prepare for Plan S. So this survival guide is also sort of a guide to our talk. And um, my first slide will actually tell you a little bit about the status of open access, the state of the art. It's changing. The open access is increasing as the amount of research increases throughout the world, and it has grown incredibly. The percentage of journals that are open access is actually higher than the percentage of articles. Not a lot higher, but there are quite a few articles that are still published in other types of journals. Approximately 10 to 15% of the articles that are available through open access weren't originally published as open access, but they were opened afterward by a journal that goes to open after 6 to 12 months after an embargo. So there's quite a lot of content that is now available, openly available, in one model or another. Interestingly, books are less than 1% of all scholarly books are open access. The book market has much more slowly embraced the open access movement. As a result, this talk will focus on journals, not on books. Books are coming along, but they have a whole different set of issues that don't really relate to the journal market. So we'll focus on that. What a lot of people don't realize is that the amount of content actually funded by Plan S funders is very small. It's roughly 3.3 to 3.5% of all articles published globally. So a lot of journals may not even be affected by Plan S if they don't have articles from these funders. As I said, the volume of open access increases with the amount of increase in research, and it's also changing the way research is coming out of various parts of the world. The top 12 research producing countries are also the top 12 open access publication producing countries. And I'll show you how that breaks down in the next slide. There are 12,000 open access journals now listed in the directory of open access journals, and it's increasing at a very fast pace. And along with the pace, there are also changes in trends. I do apologize that this slide is a little hard to view, but I think it presents information that is really vital to following trends geographically. So I'd like to give credit to Digital Science for this illustration that occurs in their direct access report that's referenced at the end of the webinar. And it's downloadable, and I suggest you do read that document because it has a lot of really good information on not only trends within the world, but also on discoverability with regard to altmetrics and other points. A couple of things I'd like to point out that you can see from the color coding, which is very helpful for those who aren't color impaired. The United States and the United Kingdom, and also Germany and France to some extent, have stayed fairly steadily in their top positions. This slide is no longer accurate, in that China has now become the number one producer of research and output in the world. So they're at the number one spot, which I believe occurred in 2018. But United States is second, and mostly the United States and United Kingdom have kept their position and held it because of the embrace of open access. Similar with Germany. You can see this has not been true with certain other countries. Switzerland, for instance, and the Netherlands have fallen off of the top 12 positions, and they are still falling. Australia has kept its position by a very assertive grasp of open access. And you'll also notice that India, which wasn't even on the chart in 2000 or even 2004, is now in the number 10 position, and they're growing very rapidly. So the most rapid growth is occurring in China and in India, and both of those countries strongly support open access publishing. So the models, you've all heard the various models employed, but I thought it would be helpful to review the definitions of the models as has been defined in Coalition S. The models are gold, which is open immediately, open access with an author processing charge. Platinum or diamond is gold with no author processing charges. So it's open immediately, but no charges. The cost can be assumed by a lot of different entities, a sponsor, a grant, funding. In the case of China, it's covered by the government. So that gives them a definite advantage. And there is a feeling that this is going to be attracting papers from the United States to China for open access publishing. And they just recently, last week, announced a new chemical journal that's coming out of China in English, open access, diamond. So that will represent some competition to the U.S. Markets in that field. The bronze is delayed open access, which is approximately 40% of all articles. And those are journals that originally publish under a paywall with an embargo, and then make the content available after a period of usually 6 months to a year. Green is self-archiving by the author of the author-accepted manuscript or version of record. Green is becoming a very popular alternative for compliance with Plan S, and I'll tell you more about that later. The hybrid is a combination of gold with an APC and subscription. Hybrids journals are not accepted under the Plan S. One other aspect of publishing that's evolving in response to the open access is the increase in the use of institutional repositories that are creating open science alternatives. There are over 3,500 repositories, self-archiving repositories in the directory of open access repositories. And these come from various sources. They can be institutional repositories, such as with a university or a library. They can be by subject, which is archive or PubMed Central or bioRxiv, and they can be an aggregation under a certain government entity. They're all increasing. They're increasing mostly in the area of institutional repositories. A lot of institutions are making it mandatory for authors to post their content in the institutional repositories. Repositories include all types of content. And this is sometimes called gray content or gray literature, and they can be books, theses, conference proceedings, multimedia reports, but they're mostly journal articles. I think about 70% are journal articles. So there's quite a lot of content available in there, and they get a lot of traffic. The the popularity of repositories is specific to field. They're more popular with math and physics, less so with biomedical, which usually requires content to be originally published with a journal and not published elsewhere, although this is changing somewhat. And some repositories are compliant with Plan S, such as PubMed Central and and Archive are compliant, and some are not, which is bioRxiv is not compliant with Plan S. And a lot of this has to do with whether the archive accepts accepted manuscripts. Um, bioRxiv does not allow authors to deposit manuscripts that are accepted elsewhere, and that's why it's not compliant. Um, Archive allows authors to do that, however, and they are doing it, and repositories such as Archive are becoming very popular, and they are open access, Plan S compliant. So this is, I think, an area to really monitor and look at as an option to um, flipping a journal to open access. And I'd like to mention now that Ingenta Open offers a very good option for hosting open access content of all types. Uh, Ingenta Open links to Ingenta Connect's 1.8 million users, which is an incredible opportunity for an audience for traffic and citations, and it's free to researchers. It includes all kinds of content that can accommodate all types of content types. So it can serve as a repository, and it has the powerful search tools of Ingenta Connect. So if you're looking at going this route, you might talk with them about that possibility. So Plan S, it engenders a lot of controversy, and it can be a very painful topic for a lot of publishers, but it does seem to be the reality, and I can tell you a little bit about what the various issues are. It was originally presented by Coalition S, which is an international consortium of research funders, and that requires that scientific publishers that receive publicly funded grants be published in compliant open access journals or platforms. It is supported by the EU, and it's coordinated by Science Europe, and it has gathered a lot of support in the European communities, not quite so much in the US. The funders come from a variety of sources. You can see they're mostly international. One exception would be the Gates Foundation. And that's the one that has the most impact on United States, although Wellcome Trust and UKRI also probably are factors. That this list is changing. There's talk that China has signed on to it, but they haven't been listed as an official funder, and I don't know if an actual country can sign on to support. So it may be philosophically that they agree, but are not an official funder that require the criteria of Plan S. The current status is a Coalition S implementation guidance. It came out in September and was open for a comment period from November to February. The amount of comments were overwhelming, so they extended the time period for comment to February. They received well over 600 comments, Some of them were in the hundreds of pages long. So it's taken a while to process all of those. The revised guidelines are due June 2019. Other groups are looking at Plan S to come up with strategies. The Wellcome Trust is partnering with UKRI and ALPS, and they're exploring strategies and business models, particularly designed to help learned societies. That initiative is underway now, and they are expecting to announce it in July 2019. So that is something that could be very important to learned societies in particular. Another initiative is OA 2020. That was actually announced in 2015, and it's an effort designed to assert a smooth, swift, and scholarly oriented transition to open access by converting resources spent on journal subscriptions into funds that will support OA business models. They feel that this can be done on a cost neutral basis, and I think we'll have to wait and see how that works. But you can see the two of these initiatives, Coalition S and OA 2020, both call for this to happen under a fairly rigorous time frame that has caused a lot of concern to some. So who does this affect? It affects a lot of different people, different ways. Everyone has views on it. Some mixed, some very strong. Publishers have a mixed response, mostly opposing Plan S, although there is a strong support for open access in general, but they have concerns about the Plan S loss of subscription revenue, something near and dear to all of us. The sustainability of APCs, which is important for small publishers that don't have the large scale. The lack of funding in certain markets, such as developing countries, and the disproportionate impact on society and learned publishers and small and nonprofit publishers who really don't have the scale to compete with large publishers. Librarians, pardon me, I hadn't finished yet. Librarians are, not surprisingly, most supportive of Plan S. They encourage institutional repositories. They encourage the role of librarians as publishers in controlling that aspect of the content, and the decrease in cost that's expected to come with the availability of open access content. Researchers, I've got ahead of myself again. Researchers have mixed concerns. They are concerned about the loss of choice to be able to submit a publication to their journal of choice, to the high impact journals, which would be less inclined to go to open access. They're concerned about not having journals in their field, so they don't have a choice of where to submit. But on the other hand, they're also pleased with the increased access and citations that come with open access journals, and the general visibility that they get from open access and sharing of information and research. The feeling about the mix of feelings about open access with researchers depends a lot on the field that they're in. Some fields very strongly support open publication, such as physics and math and the physical sciences, whereas others in biomedical feel that it has to go through a peer review and usually are more inclined to have delayed response. Whereas the humanities have other concerns which relate to lack of funding. So different issues, different groups. One of the problems with Plan S is the unresolved issues, and these have yet to be forthcoming from the implementation guidance, but they have acknowledged them, that there's a disproportionate burden felt by certain groups, that there's a lack of detail in the guidance that has caused some uncertainty, and that there are unrealistic expectations. Specifically, they have pointed out the fact that there's a negative effect on learned societies, which I mentioned previously, the authors in territories that lack funding, such as developing or third world countries that don't have the funding to be able to support open access, and the lack of content in certain fields. For open access journals, there's a lack of a vehicle to publish this kind of content, and as well the disproportionate impact on humanities and social sciences, which don't often have the funding to support open access. Other problems are the technical requirements, which I'll talk with you later. They're rather extensive. The caps on author processing charges as to whether they can actually be sustainable, and the timelines imposed. The coalition has promised to address these concerns in the guidance forthcoming in June, so we will have to adopt a wait and see attitude with that. Meanwhile, they have issued implementation guidelines, and they cover a full gamut of requirements. In general, the Plan S requirements are immediate open access with no embargo. The license has to be Creative Commons CC BY, which is allowing the copyright to be retained by the author, so the publisher can no longer hold the copyright, which means the publisher doesn't always control the content, and that can have a big effect on subsidiary rights. APCs are capped, but the level is not defined, so that creates a degree of uncertainty. The requirement is for waivers to be available and in place for authors from low-income countries. A lot of journals do now have, open access journals have waivers and will allow this, but that it's now a requirement. Journals are also required to disclose all costs, all prices, all fees, so that their financial situation is completely transparent and publicly available on their platform. The author accepted manuscript of the version of record has to be posted. It can't be the original submission. And sister or mirror journals are not acceptable. These are journals that share the same editorial board and often work under a cascade model, where articles that are submitted to the parent or subscription journal are then moved to the open access journal if they're not accepted in the main journal. This is not an acceptable workflow under Plan S. Hybrids are not acceptable unless a transformative agreement is in place, and repository deposits are conditionally acceptable only if the repository fulfills the criteria, which I will review. The platform compliance really represents standards of business practice in publishing, although some components may not be in place. This is a good time to look at your platform and see if it is. DOIs must be used as permanent identifiers, which I think is fairly standard, but personal identifications need to be available with versioning to show version control. Long-term digital preservation or archiving with clocks or locks needs to be in place, and the format needs to be full text, machine readable, such as in XML format, which allows text and data mining. Some publishers don't allow this, but it's a requirement under Plan S. There has to be linking in the metadata to underlying data, code in external repositories, that the scientific data to support the article. And the high quality level metadata has to be under a public domain license. That's a CCO license for public domain. The OA status has to be included in the metadata has to be machine readable, so it would be in the XML metadata to show the OA access status and the license under which that status is granted. Support has to be provided for personal identification for not only authors but also funders, grants, and other entities involved with the manuscript. And the citation data has to be openly accessible. Now, a lot of these things are already in place. Some may not be, but they certainly are achievable, particularly with Ingenta or any other platforms. Repository compliance requires that the self-archiving policy of the venue be registered in Sherpa or Romeo. Sherpa is a group supporting open access repositories in UK universities, and it stands for Securing a Hybrid Environment for Research, Preservation, and Access. Romeo is a listing of publishers' copyright agreement and authors' rights. So whatever archiving policy is followed has to be registered in one of these two entities. The registry also has to be included in the directory of open access registries. It has to have a automated manuscript ingest facility. So the ability to automatically ingest the manuscript. It has to be stored in full text in JATS standard format, DTD or equivalent. And the data has to be quality assured and standard interoperable format. So these all have to be standard formats. They have to use an open API to allow others, including machine readable formats, to access the content. Has to be integrated full text with core abstract and indexing services such as PubMed. Has to be continuously available on a regular basis, 24-hour, and have a help desk. This may be a stretch for some repositories, but a lot of them are fulfilling these requirements. There are three paths to compliance. You can have a compliant article, although if it's in a hybrid journal, it's not acceptable. So unless there's a transformative agreement in place. Or you can have a compliant journal, or it can be a compliant repository. So whichever path you choose to compliance, these are the three ways to do it. Ingenta's platform is fully compliant, and it can support these options, but individual publishers need to engage the features. And this is true of any platform. Most of the platforms are compliant, but they need to be engaged, and that may require a cost or added functionality for the platform. So what is a transformative agreement? Only with a transformative agreement is a hybrid journal acceptable under the Plan S criteria. So the components of these agreements are that there has to be a willingness to transform to OA in 3 years. The agreements can't go longer than 3 years, and they have to show a plan for what will happen after the 3 years, that will a plan for allowing the journal to become open access. So you can't just say, I'd like to do it. There has to be a plan in place for how this is going to be implemented. The contracts and the costs have to be publicly available on the journal site. They have to be accessible to anyone who wants to submit. And the negotiations need to be concluded by the end of 2021. So these agreements can't extend beyond that period. So some of these agreements are now in place. There's different types of transformative agreements that are emerging, and they're basically designed to offset subscription costs and transfer those costs from subscription to publishing. So I think Lisa Hinchcliffe, who's done some really super writing on this in the Scholarly Kitchen, did a very good, succinct um, uh, abbreviation or a definition of transformative agreements that I've shown here. And they come in different types, but I think that the whole idea is to shift the cost. So this can be done in different ways. There are read and publish agreements, and there are publish and read agreements. With a read and publish agreement, the publisher receives payment for reading and payment for publishing in a single contract, but they derive income predominantly from subscriptions, which is offset by the cost of publishing. With the publish and read agreement, the publisher receives payment only for publishing, and reading is included at no additional cost. So under these agreements, the publisher derives income predominantly from publishing, and then the reading is provided. This can have an impact on a library consortium, which may have institutions that are read and publish or publish and read at different levels, and they distribute the cost on that basis. So under a read and publish, all the libraries in a consortium are responsible for read access. So all of the libraries share the cost of read. In a publish and read situation, the costs may be borne only by libraries or institutions that have a high level of publishing activity. So they will have fewer supporting the reading of all the rest. So that can have an impact on how consortia agreements are negotiated. You can see that a read agreement might have a disadvantage in that the volume of APCs may not be sustainable. And in a publish agreement, the staff and the infrastructure at an institution may be overly burdened by supporting open access and APCs and keeping track of all that. So there's a downside to each of these, as well as to the publishers. Two cases that have recently come out that I think illustrate this very well is a publish and read agreement recently reached by Project Deal in Germany with Wiley. The articles by authors from institutions in Project Deal will be published to open access in Wiley journals, and everyone at those institutions will be able to access all of Wiley content, read all of Wiley content at no additional cost. So this agreement is supported by the publishing, and the publishing fee is set at 2,750 euros per article for an estimated 10,000 articles that would be published by authors in Wiley hybrid journals. So this agreement is subject to review based on the number of published articles being published in those journals and the number of individuals reading in those journals. But that's the way it's set up right now, to be supported by the publishing entity. A read and publish deal was recently set by California Digital Library and Cambridge University Press. There's been a lot of news about this and the fact that Elsevier lost their account there with California. Under this agreement, 60% of California's overall spend on Cambridge journals will be used to support unlimited open access publishing. And the remainder, the read part, is assigned to reading content that is not open access or subscription content. Over time, the publishing portion is designed to grow while the read part diminishes gradually. This agreement is evolving, and Cambridge has indicated that it may, in fact, over time result in less revenue. It really depends on the level of sustainability, publishing, and the amount of reading. But these are two examples of those types of agreements. So one way you can assess your risks is to look at your own program on the basis of this and see what are the issues. How compliant is your platform? What's your subscriber base is one thing to look at. What proportion of read and publish activity do you have within your own subscriber base? And would one of these transformative agreements work for you? Also, what kind of geographic distribution? Do you have a strong international presence in your subscriber base? In Europe, they are looking for open access, so there will be some resistance to the subscription model. So if you have a strong US base, there may be less restriction. There may be less price sensitivity. Look at your author base. Geographic funding, is it in US, Europe, developing countries? If you have a lot of authors in the US and they don't rely on funding in Europe or the UK, that may not be an issue. And also, what kind of funding sources are available? Do they have funding supported by Coalition S funding? Do they have other sorts of funding? And are there OA requirements? So if that's not a factor, then there may not be a risk. The Highwire Press looked at different options people are reviewing, and most of them, the four most popular ones, are the green open access option to comply, the deposit to existing servers or repositories. That a lot of publishers are going this route. Posted OA of the accepted final manuscript. In other words, posting that on their platform and then replacing it with the published version under a paywall when it's finally published, or stay the course, which are doing. So the next step is to, I think, ensure that the platform and the repository is compliant. And if you have questions about this, Ingenta has solutions and they can help you. Gather data for decision making and compliance. You can look at your own subscriber base, your author base, use your subscription reports and your sales reports, and also your manuscript tracking can capture information on where the manuscripts are coming from and whether there's funding available. That can be captured there. And consider business models based on your profile. You may need to switch. You may be fine the way you are. And explore opportunities. You could create new journals. You might have a lot of open access submissions, and that might be an opportunity to create a new journal. Or you may want to take this chance to look at your workflow and go into a XML first workflow that could have efficiencies and time benefits going down the line. Or consider alternate business models. You may want to look at certain journals that are worth flipping and look at all the options that entails, which that can be considerable, especially impacts on revenue. You may need to look at sources of revenue that come from collections, consortia, bundles, which would be affected by flipping. Also, do you have a lot of derivative income from areas that you would be giving up in an open access model because the publisher would no longer own copyright? So that could be reprints, permissions, licensing, other options. And most of all, keep informed. There's a lot of information coming out of this industry. We're very fortunate to have a wealth of talent and a lot of information coming to us. It's hard to keep up, I know, but there are some really good ways to do that. And these are some of the information sources that I follow, that I've also used in this talk, that have been very helpful to me. And they're continuing to publish on this topic and monitor the situation. So these are areas that I think could be very helpful to you. and keeping informed now and in the future. So, thank you very much for joining. If you have any questions, please let me know. I'm available. And always, Maverick is here to help if you think that we can be of any service. So, thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much for that, Rebecca. That was an excellent presentation. Obviously, if anyone does have any further questions, then please get in contact with either Rebecca or Ingenta. There are clearly many things there for publishers to reflect on, and we hope everyone listening found this webinar insightful. If anyone is interested in learning more about the content discovery platform or want to find out how they can be configured for your organization, please get in contact with us. Ingenta will actually have a number of webinars over the coming months, so please check out our website and follow us on our Twitter handle at WeAreIngenta or via the Ingenta LinkedIn posts. Questions, please get in contact with us on info@ingenta.com. Well, thanks very much for that, Rebecca, and to our listeners. I hope everyone found that really enjoyable. We hope you can join us on our next webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Bye.